Here's an object that should stop you cold, a tiny seashell, no bigger than your fingernail, with a small hole deliberately drilled through it so that it could be threaded onto a cord and worn. Nothing about that shell helps you hunt. Nothing about it helps you eat or stay warm or fight off a predator. It has no practical purpose at all. It is purely and simply decoration, something made to be worn, something made to be seen. And it is roughly 100,000 years old. Sit with that for a second. 100,000 years ago, long before farming, before cities, before writing, before almost everything we think of as civilization, a human being sat down and spent real, careful effort making something whose only job was to be worn on the body, to adorn, to be looked at, to make the wearer appear a certain way to the people around them. And it wasn't a one-off. We have found these beads by the thousands on different continents, going back further than almost any other kind of human-made object. Drilled shells, strings of them, made over and over across vast stretches of time and space, by people who had every reason to spend their limited energy on survival, and who chose anyway to spend some of it on this. And here is what really gets me about those shells. Making one was not quick or easy. You had to know which shells to collect, often traveling to the right shoreline to find them. You had to pierce each one without shattering it. A delicate, patient job with stone tools. You had to gather enough of them and string them and wear them. That is hours of skilled, deliberate work, repeated again and again, by people for whom hours were precious and survival was never guaranteed. They did it anyway across 100,000 years. They kept doing it. Whatever drove this, it was not idle. It was something people were willing to spend real effort on generation after generation, because it clearly mattered to them as much as the practical business of staying alive, which tells us something that genuinely reshapes how we see ourselves. Caring how you look is not a recent indulgence. It is not a modern sickness or a product of mirrors and magazines and filters. It is one of the oldest deliberate things our species has ever done. So that is the question for today. When did humans first start caring how they looked? And why on earth would creatures scraping to survive pour precious effort into their own appearance? The answer is older and deeper and far more meaningful than vanity. Stick with me. Let's start with the evidence because it is remarkable and it goes back staggeringly far. Those drilled shells I mentioned are some of the oldest pieces of it. At sites scattered from Africa to the Near East, archaeologists have found small shells, often a particular kind of sea snail, carefully pierced and in many cases showing the telltale wear and polish of having been strung together and worn against the skin. The oldest of them push back to around 100,000 years ago and possibly beyond. These are among the earliest evidence we have of humans doing something purely symbolic, something whose entire value was in what it meant and how it looked, not in what it physically did. And shells were only the beginning. Our ancestors reached for color too. There's a mineral called ochre, an earth pigment rich in iron that produces deep reds and yellows when ground into powder. And the evidence for ancient humans collecting, grinding, and using ochre is overwhelming and astonishingly old. At some sites, we find ochre that was processed in real quantity, going back over 100,000 years. At one famous site in southern Africa, archaeologists even found what looks like a complete ancient toolkit for making ochre paint grinding equipment, shells used as containers, the works, a 100,000-year-old workshop for producing color. Color that, as far as we can tell, was used to mark and paint the body and objects to decorate. And the care that went into some of this is breathtaking when you really look at it. At that same southern African site, researchers found pieces of ochre that had been deliberately engraved with careful, repeating geometric patterns. Cross-hatched designs scratched into the stone with obvious intention, tens of thousands of years before anything we'd call art history. Someone sat down and decorated a lump of pigment. Think about the layers of meaning there. A person who cared about pattern, about design, about making a mark that meant something, using a material whose purpose was to make other things, including, almost certainly, their own skin. Look a particular way. This is not the behavior of a creature indifferent to appearance. This is a mind already deeply invested in how things and people are made to look. And it is worth pausing on just how far back and how widespread this is, because it overturns a stubborn assumption. We tend to imagine that for most of prehistory, humans were too primitive, too preoccupied with raw survival to bother with anything symbolic, and that decoration and ornament arrived late, as a kind of luxury once life got easier. The evidence says the opposite. The beads, the ochre, the engraved designs, they're there at the very foundations of our species, among the oldest traces of modern human behavior we possess. Adornment didn't arrive after we became fully human. It arrived with it, It may even be one of the things that marks the arrival. Then come the more elaborate things as you move forward in time. Beads carved from bone and ivory and stone. Pierced animal teeth worn as pendants. Pigments engraved sprinkled over the dead. Eventually evidence of tattooing, of carefully arranged hairstyles, of clothing made not just for warmth but for display. The deeper archaeologists dig, the clearer it becomes wherever you find anatomically modern humans. You find them decorating themselves. It is one of the most reliable signatures of our kind. We are the animal that adorns. So that is the what and the when, at least 100,000 years, probably longer, woven through our whole existence as a species. But the far more interesting question is the why. Because here is the thing that should puzzle you. In a world that hard, where every calorie and every hour mattered for survival, why would humans spend any effort at all on something as seemingly frivolous as looking a certain way? The answer is that it was never frivolous, not even slightly, because for a human being, how you look was never just about beauty. It was a language, one of the most important languages we ever developed. Think about what a string of particular shells or a pattern of ochre paint on the skin could say instantly, silently, to everyone who saw you. It could say which group you belong to. In a world of many bands and tribes, your adornment marked you as one of us or one of them at a single glance. It could say your status, that you were a skilled hunter, a respected elder, a person who had achieved something, or come of age, or earned a particular place. It could say you were available as a partner, or that you were taken. It could say you were in mourning, or celebrating, or ready for war. It could announce your family, your lineage, your role. In other words, the way an ancient human decorated their body was a kind of identity card, a flag, and a billboard all at once. Worn on the skin, readable by everyone, in a world that had no writing and no other way to broadcast who you were. Your appearance was information, vital social information. In a species whose entire survival ran on the group, on knowing who belonged, who could be trusted, who stood where, being able to signal your identity and read others was not a luxury. It was survival infrastructure. And there is a deeper layer here, one the archaeology actually shows us. Some of those ancient beads were made from shells that originated hundreds of kilometers away from where they were finally worn, carried, traded, passed hand to hand across vast distances, which means an ornament wasn't only saying who you were, it could also say how far your connections reached, what networks you were part of, what you had access to. A necklace could be a map of your relationships, a sign of your reach in the world. The effort and rarity behind an ornament was itself part of the message. Anyone can make a mark. Not everyone can wear shells from a distant sea. Adornment carried meaning precisely because it cost something to produce, and that cost was legible to everyone who saw it. This is also why the specific styles mattered so much. The particular way one group strung its beads, the particular patterns one people painted on their skin. These became shared codes, recognizable signatures, almost like the visual dialect of a community. To wear them correctly was to demonstrate that you truly belonged, that you knew the code from the inside. To get them wrong, or to wear another group's markings, said something too. In a world of small bands threaded across a landscape, these visual codes were how people sorted the social world at a glance, and how each person announced every single day exactly where they fit in it. So when an ancient human spent an evening drilling shells or grinding ochre to paint their skin, they weren't being shallow. They were participating in one of the most important systems their society had, the system by which people told each other who they were. Caring how you looked was caring about your place in the human world, and that has never been frivolous in 100,000 years. Now here is where it gets genuinely profound, because this drive points to something deep about the human mind itself. To care how you look, you have to be able to do something extraordinary, something that, as far as we can tell, almost no other animal can fully do. You have to be able to imagine yourself through someone else's eyes. You have to be able to step outside your own head, picture how you appear to another person, and care about that image. Think about how strange and sophisticated that actually is. It means holding a model of your own self in your mind and a model of other minds perceiving that self, and connecting the two. That capacity to see yourself as others, see you as one of the cornerstones of human self-awareness. And the moment our ancestors started decorating their bodies to shape how others perceived them, they were leaving us physical proof that they had it. Those 100,000-year-old shell beads aren't just jewelry. They are some of the oldest evidence we have that human beings had become self-aware in this deep way, that they could think about themselves as a self that others observe and judge. In a real sense, the birth of caring how you look and the birth of the fully self-conscious human mind may be the very same event. The bead on the string is a fossil of self-awareness. Consider how rare this really is in the animal world. A handful of animals, great apes, dolphins, a few others, can recognize themselves in a mirror, which is already a remarkable feat, but humans go enormously further. We don't just recognize ourselves, we obsess over the self, we imagine others see, we lie awake replaying how we came across. We change our surface deliberately to manage that imagined impression. No other animal decorates itself to send a chosen message about its identity to an audience of other minds. A peacock's tail is spectacular, but the peacock didn't design it, can't change it, and isn't imagining how the PA hen perceives him. A human painting symbols onto their skin is doing something categorically different, deliberately authoring an appearance for an audience, based on a mental picture of how that audience will read it. That is a towering cognitive achievement, and we do it so naturally we forget it is there. So when you stand in front of a mirror and care about what you see, you are exercising one of the most distinctively human powers there is, the power to hold yourself in your own mind as an object that others perceive. It can be a burden, that power. It can make us anxious and self-conscious, but it is also the very thing that makes art, empathy, language, and society possible, because all of them depend on the same ability to model other minds and to imagine yourself within them. Caring how you look is a side effect of one of the greatest gifts evolution ever gave us. And once you understand that adornment was a language and a sign of self-awareness, all its different uses snap into focus. It was about belonging, marking yourself as part of your group, sharing the patterns and ornaments that said we are one people. There are few things more human than the comfort of looking like you belong. It was about distinction, standing out, showing your individual achievements, your status, your story. The same system that let you blend in with your group also let you say within it, here is who I particularly am. It was very often about attraction, making yourself appealing to potential partners, signaling health, vitality, effort, creativity. The peacock does it with feathers. It can't take off. Humans did it with ornaments they could make, choose, and change, which is arguably even more impressive. And notice what adornment signals to a potential partner that raw biology can't: effort, skill, taste, resourcefulness. A beautifully made ornament says you have the time, the ability, and the care to create something fine. Qualities worth pairing with. In choosing how to present yourself, you were advertising not just your looks, but your mind and your hands. And it was again and again about the sacred paint and ornament for rituals, for ceremonies, for marking the great transitions of life and death. To decorate the body was often to transform it, to step into a role, to become something more than ordinary for a moment. Some of the deepest human ceremonies have always involved changing how the body looks. A young person painted and adorned to mark their passage into adulthood. A body prepared with red ochre and ornaments for burial, sent into death wearing the marks of who they were. A group transformed by paint before a hunt, a dance, a war. In these moments, how you looked wasn't about individual vanity at all. It was about meaning, about ritual, about marking the sacred turning points of a human life. Appearance became a way of saying that this moment, this person, this transition mattered. So when did humans first start caring how they looked? Like so many of the deepest human things, it doesn't have a single birthday. It reaches back as far as we can see, at least 100,000 years in the hard evidence of beads and ochre, and very possibly further, into times that left no trace. It appears to have emerged hand in hand with symbolic thought itself. With language, with self-awareness, with the whole package of becoming fully human. We didn't start caring how we look at some particular point in history. It seems to be part of what being human is. And here is the part I most want you to carry away from this. We are weirdly ashamed of this part of ourselves. We treat caring about appearance as vanity, as weakness, as something to apologize for. We imagine it as a modern affliction, a sickness of a superficial age, but the deep history says something completely different and something kinder. The urge to shape how you appear to others is not a flaw, and it is not new. It is one of the oldest, most human things you carry. It comes from the same ancient place as the need to belong, to be known, to have a place among your people. When you chose what to wear this morning, when you fixed your hair, when you cared even a little about the face in the mirror, you were not being shallow. You were doing something your ancestors did 100,000 years ago, by firelight with shells and ochre. You were speaking the oldest silent language there is. You were saying, to whoever you'd meet that day, here I am. This is who I am. This is the group I belong to, the person I am, the story I carry. That isn't vanity. It is one of the most fundamentally human things you will ever do. And every new tool we invent for it is just the latest version of those shells. The clothes, the styles, the haircuts, and yes, even the carefully chosen photos and the filters we sometimes feel so guilty about. All of it runs on the exact same ancient impulse that drove someone to drill a hole in a seashell 100,000 years ago. The technology changes. The deep need does not. Social media is just the newest campfire we gather around to show each other who we are. We have always done this. We have always cared how we look to the people we live among because we have always desperately wanted to belong to them and to be known by them. So let's go back one last time to that tiny shell with the hole drilled through it, 100,000 years old, made by a human being who, in the middle of a hard and dangerous life, took the time to make something whose only purpose was to be worn, to be seen, to say something about who they were. When did humans first start caring how they looked? Almost certainly from the very moment we became the kind of creature that could imagine being seen at all. It is not a modern weakness. It is an ancient signature of the self-aware, deeply social, storytelling animal we have always been. The face you check in the mirror is looking back across 100,000 years. So here is my question for you, and I really do want to know. The next time you catch yourself caring how you look and feel that little flicker of guilt about it, does it change anything to know you're doing something 100,000 years old, something woven into the very birth of the human mind? Is caring how we look really vanity, or is it something far deeper, the ancient need to be seen and known and to belong? Let me know in the comments. I read them, and the way people reflect on questions like this is always the best part. Until then, take care of yourselves and of each other, and I'll see you soon.